In my other life, I am the editor of Faith Life's Bible Study magazine. And one of my first acts as editor was to give myself a column, Word Nerd, Language and the Bible. They said I could, though. I also turn all the columns, plus a few that aren't in print, into YouTube videos for the Logos Bible Software YouTube channel. Like and subscribe and all that. One of my first videos was on an obscure feature in the New American Standard Bible, little asterisks that indicate when the translators translated historical presence in the Greek, like Jesus goes into the city, as pasts, like Jesus went into the city. Good English just demands past tenses in these situations, even though the Greek is clearly in the present tense. It just sounds so breathless, so weird, even though it is, yes, possible to match the Greek with an English present. He goes into the city. The fact that even the NASB, which is generally considered one of the most literal translations, could not bring itself to translate literally shows that forms don't match one-to-one across languages. For what it's worth, using the magic of logos, I was able to count the number of times the King James translators themselves translated historical presence as present versus past. It was a mix. They didn't consistently follow a single policy. But they could have. They could have been more literal. So could the NASB 95. All major modern evangelical translations could have reflected more of the forms of New Testament Greek more often than they did. If they did, they would have been following a principle that I hear assumed all the time, but rarely spelled out in any detail. It goes like this. Literaler is better. In its strongest form, the form in which I usually see it, it goes like this. Literal equals moral. In other words, it's wrong to use something other than literal translation strategies. People don't spell this out in any detail, so much as assume it. I did when I first sat down as a then-new seminary student to evaluate the then-new ESV against the NASB that my pastor used at the time. Now, I like to reductio people's stated linguistic principles to absurdum levels. I like to see if the principles people sometimes so confidently assume and state about Bible interpretation and translation actually work. Do they work? Do they work and work and work? If you keep them going and going ad infinitum, do they end up causing nauseums? In my Word Nerd video, I imagined the creation of an INCREDI-NASB, a superhero Bible that collected all the nerdy Bible conventions one could dream up. And oh, could I dream. Blue highlights for grammatically masculine words, pink for feminine ones, gray for neuter, single underlines for singular words, double underlines for plural ones, little dots and dashes connecting words that were alliterated in the originals. This is all clearly absurd, though. I mean, right? So absurd that everyone will realize the INCREDI-NASB is a totally made-up superhero, that I love the NASB and I use it regularly, that no one at the Lockman Foundation needs to sue me or anything because we're all Christians here, right? This is a specific kind of nerdy, niche, hyperbolic satire. The point is, no one would actually do these things in an English Bible translation, right? Apparently they would. Because I get this same style of argument all the time. I hear it from the King James only folks who argue that if contemporary English no longer marks second-person personal pronouns for number, I'm talking about you, we're just going to have to stick with the more literally accurate 500-year-old forms, thee and ye, even if many people today, not least those in King James only churches, don't actually know that ye and you are plural. But I also hear this literaler is better principle from lots of my conservative brothers, and kind of from people I think ought to know better, like, I just can't bear to say their names. I don't want this to be personal. But I have heard it from one of my own favorite theologians and from a world-class expository preacher. Literaler is better is a common trap. As with many common traps, there is some truth set in this one as bait. We'll get to that. But first, we have to reductio. Let's reductio to absurdum levels. That was a long intro. I know there are many things that can be said on this topic, many arguments to make, but the one I'm making in this piece, this video, is precisely what I just said, a reductio ad absurdum. I want to show that if this principle is applied consistently, It results in absurdities. All major evangelical translations in English match the forms of the Hebrew and Greek very, very often. It is the baseline for them all, even the New Living Translation. This is what I take literal to mean, when most of its proponents don't really define it. Matching Hebrew and Greek linguistic forms with standard corresponding conventional English matches. All major translations do this. They just tend to move away from those forms under three major pressures. One, when English demands it, as is frequently the case in word order, for example. Two, when communicating the meaning demands it, as is frequently the case with idioms, figures of speech that is, for example. And three, when the presumed audience demands it, as with translations aimed at 7th graders, like the NIV, or at new believers, like the NIRV, or even elementary schoolers, same, NIRV. The more functional translations simply increase the frequency of doing these things out of a desire to communicate clearly to whoever's in their imagined audience.
But what if INCREDI-NASB came in and stopped them? What would our literaler-than-thou superhero do?
By the way, his examples will stick mostly to Greek because that requires less homework for him, and he is a poorly remunerated superhero.
INCREDI-NASB
would mark number impersonal pronouns with the same single and double underlines that I proposed in my Word Nerd video for relative pronouns. So the King James onlyists would be satisfied because you, singular, would know the number of every single second-person pronoun in the Bible. Also, countless adjectives would now get number identifiers, helping you know what nouns they are modifying.
INCREDI-NASB
would assign colors to all the Greek verb tenses: yellow for present, blue for perfect, orange for imperfect, crimson for aorist, chartreuse for future perfect, and burnt sienna, that I always wondered about that crayon, for pluperfect. We don't have to do a total reductio here because often the English forms do match up just fine with the Greek ones. For example, in the beginning was the word is imperfect in Greek and imperfect in English. But in the famous phrase in Paul, God gave the increase, that's the King James, the verb is imperfect in the Greek, and only one major translation reflects this in the English. So I guess in the cheaper version of the INCREDI-NASB, only those places where English translators feel they absolutely must stray away from Greek and Hebrew forms will be marked with these colors. INCREDI-NASB would make sure to say the Jesus whenever there is an article in front of his name in the Greek. Then the Jesus came from Galilee. Then the Jesus went throughout all the towns and villages. This will sound odd in English, of course, but no one will misunderstand the reference, and they will get every bit of information from the Greek. Literaler is better. Translators are forever straying unnecessarily from the inspired word order of Greek sentences.
INCREDI-NASB
would fix these errors. Sometimes English just cannot bear the Greek word order, especially with post-positive particles like gar and de, which mean therefore and or but. These simply have to go at the beginning of clauses in English, not in slot 2, second word in the clause as in Greek. But INCREDI-NASB thinks that people just need a little help, and they'll be able to see how important it is to stick with the Hebrew and Greek word order everywhere possible. If it isn't really possible, we need to make it possible. As one YouTube commenter told me just the other day, our philosophy of translation is to make the Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic the standard, not the English. So, a little explanatory note in the introduction will help readers see that, because literaler is better, some sentences are just going to have to be awkward. Whom for sent the God the words of the God speaks, not for out of measure he gives the Spirit. Amen? Sometimes even the rather literal King James Version turns articles in the Greek into indefinite articles in English. In one of the most famous examples, this has the publican, the tax collector, in Jesus' wonderful little parable in Luke 18, saying, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. A sinner instead of the sinner. INCREDI-NASB will correct the King James. The King James also had Satan bringing Jesus up to a pinnacle of the temple, when very clearly the Greek says the pinnacle of the temple. INCREDI-NASB would achieve perfect consistency in the use of articles. It'll be so easy. If the Greek or Hebrew has an article, so will the INCREDI-NASB. If it doesn't,
INCREDI-NASB will blast it out of existence with his literal ray.
Here are a few quick sample phrases. Our Father, the one in the heavens. Like they are children, the ones in the marketplace sitting. Depart from me, the ones who work the lawlessness. Also, the King James is continually adding indefinite articles where the Greek has quite literally nothing. INCREDI-NASB could take these out in his sleep. For example, Paul, apostle of Jesus Christ, through will God to the saints, the ones in Ephesus. Finally, and this decision has proven controversial in the hyperbolic, satirical, red-headed YouTube video commentator community, INCREDI-NASB would decline personal names the way Greek does. That is, INCREDI-NASB would make clear something that English translations never ever bring out, the grammatical cases in which our Lord's name appears. If literaler is better, and if literal even perhaps equals moral, then we cannot flinch when it causes odd stares. The fact is that Jesus, that name, shows up in the nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and vocative cases, and you can't always tell from English translations precisely which one is being used. So we could do Jesus for nominative, Jesu for genitive, Jesu for dative, Jessoon for accusative, and an innovation of INCREDI-NASB's own invention, O Jesus for vocative. Put the ending on the beginning of the word, and its meaning is more intuitive in English. While he's at it, I guess INCREDI-NASB could decline any word whose case in his judgment isn't obvious from context. In the cheaper version, I guess we could just footnote these. So, let us read the first sample paragraph supplied to us by our favorite superhero Bible translation,
INCREDI-NASB.
Beware but the righteousness of you not to do before the men on, for to look at them. If but not indeed reward not you are having before the Father of you, the one in the heavens. Okay, I've reductioed. Here's my point in simple prose. You can almost always go more literal in Bible translation. You can always say to some pansy Bible translation that claims to be literal, oh, you call that literal? Just watch this! INCREDI-NASB once out-literaled an ESV translator for 15 hours straight till there was actually no English left except the letters. And INCREDI-NASB pointed out that the letter O in English looks the same as it does in Greek. If we could just alter the shape of a few more letters, we'd get even closer to a perfect translation. Literaler feels better. People always want to hear that they're getting a word-for-word Bible translation because a literal translation philosophy seems to take the human element out. No fallible human judgments need stand between us and God. And I totally get this temptation. Humans can mess up Bible translation. They can even do it on purpose. Just look at John 1:1 in the Jehovah's Witnesses New World Translation. Of course, it's the most extreme of King James only brothers who reductio this concern to absurdum levels. The Ruckmanites. They actually believe that the King James corrects the Greek and Hebrew, that it solves ambiguities God unfortunately inspired in these original languages. One of them wrote a book called The Certainty of the Words, How the King James Bible Resolves the Ambiguity of the Original Languages. Did you catch that? These folks believe in double inspiration, the idea that God inspired the original writers and then inspired the King James translators. They take the human element out of Bible translation. Why God even bothered to use 50-plus 17th century Anglican translators is a total mystery. He basically wrote the 1611 King James with his own finger on immense tablets that poor King James had to lug down the steps of the Tower of London in multiple trips. This double inspiration idea is actually, though, a very, very old one. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, was said very early on to have been produced by 72 translators who all worked in totally separate rooms in isolation, translated the entire Old Testament, and came out with identical translations. This could happen only if God inspired these men, obviously. Historians recently discovered that this story was invented by a pre-incarnate appearance of Peter Ruckman. To this day, Eastern Orthodox Christians use the Septuagint and not the Hebrew as the basis of their translations. I promised earlier that I would talk about the truth in this literaler is better trap. Here are a few points. First, it is often best to translate literally, especially in English, a language related to Greek. That's because translations can indeed stray from the intentions of the biblical authors by doing too much interpreting. I'm not denying that. Second, I myself tend to prefer to start my Bible study with translations that bear more traceable relationships to the forms they translate. There's something about establishing a baseline from which to work. It's useful. I see the more functional translations as illuminating the formal ones. But then I never do fail to read the more functional ones. They're the Word of God too. They are not thereby rendered unnecessary for me. Third, I was trained to exposit the text, and all my models used formal translations to do this. I could exposit any good translation anywhere on the spectrum, I feel confident, but in my tradition, the one I was trained in, I know best how to do this, especially in the New Testament, with more formal translations. They are suited to the close analysis practiced by the expositional method. Fourth, I think literaler keeps the translators safer. Literal renderings keep them from some of the knife-like tongues the King James translators warned about in their amazing preface. And when possible, it's often best to stick with tradition. I like tradition. I like it. Hear me? Come to a church service at my church. I lead the music. It's traditional. I like the King James tradition, and we use the ESV, a translation in the King James tradition. The literal is better crowd and the more extreme literal equals moral crowd are not taking something bad and making it good. They're taking something good and blowing it out of proportion. So in this little exercise, I kept blowing until, I hope, the balloon popped for you. The King James translators specifically rejected the idea that they had to be as literal as possible. In their preface, they explain that they're under no obligation to use the same English word to translate a given Hebrew or Greek word every time. They were willing to use multiple English words in various places to translate one given Hebrew or Greek word. They point to purpose or intent as stylistic options, journeys or travels, think or suppose, pain or ache, joy or gladness. They specifically said that it was best not to translate one Greek word with the same English word every time. They said, "Thus, to mince the matter, we thought to savour more of curiosity than wisdom, and that rather it would breed scorn in the atheist than bring profit to the godly reader. For is the kingdom of God become words or syllables? Why should we be in bondage to them, if we may be free? Use one precisely, when we may use another no less fit, as commodiously." 19th century scholar Robert Young, creator of Young's literal translation, was not persuaded, however. In 1862, Young complained about hundreds of specific instances he cataloged in which the King James did precisely what the translators of the King James said they would do, varying their word choice. Young called these lax renderings. He admitted that his translation principles were to some extent new, but he insisted that in his work those principles were adhered to with a severity never hitherto attempted, and the translator has perfect confidence in their accuracy and simplicity. He aspirated his T's back then. But even Young isn't severely literal enough for some people. In fact, if you think my satire was over the top, all you have to do is look at people who have tried to increase the severity levels in their literal translations. I was lying awake after midnight dreaming up parts of this script, and I did something I almost never do. I stole out of bed, grabbed my iPad Pro, and went down to the silent dining room table to plunk out my ideas. I turned on my favorite writing machine, the iPad Pro, and I kiddeth you not, the very first thing I saw was an advertisement for the literal standard version, and listened to its marketing copy. The LSV, which is actually a revision of Young's literal translation from the 19th century, is the most literal translation of the Holy Bible, with significant improvement over previous literal translations. The LSV is more severe. It is literaler than the literalist translation ever made. Wow! Here's John 3:16 in the LSV. "For God so loved the world that he gave the only begotten Son, that everyone who is believing in him may not perish, but may have continuous life." Okay, not super severe, but one way in which it is more severe is that the LSV preface doesn't give any hint that I could find, like Young did, that it's just a Bible study tool meant to be used as a supplement to the ESV, NIV, or more traditional translations, ones that are actually standards. The impression the LSV gives is that it really intends to supplant, not supplement, more traditional kinds of translations. Translations that balance form and function with a little more weight on the function, on the literariness and the readability. If you can believe it, things out there do get severer and literaler. Take a look at the fairly recent Pure Word New Testament. The private gentleman behind this project really upped the literal ante. INCREDI-NASB's Auntie Amelia, actually, the one who used to bake cookies for him when he was little, cookies that were shaped like cooks, because, well, that's what cookies literally are and therefore should be. I mean, who doesn't want the pure word? A translation that gives you, according to the marketing copy on the site, quote, "deeper scriptural understanding that has never before been achievable in English." Does that raise your expectations? So here's John 3:16 in the Pure Word New Testament. Because God has loved, with a capital L, in such a manner the Satans, in the lowercase s, world, so that he gave his Son, the only begotten risen Christ, in order that whoever is continuously by his choice committing for the result and purpose of him should not perish, but definitely should, by his choice, be continuously having eternal life. If you didn't notice, this is pure gobbledygook. You can only know what he's doing, and doing ham-handedly, I have to add, if you know Greek. I actually think it's kind of cool. I really do, that evangelicalism produces such, harebrained attempts at producing Bible study resources. It means we really, really value the Bible. But the idea that this offers us all something that has never been done in English is clearly wrong. I don't really know what the pure word New Testament is, but I know it's not English. Young's literal translation and its child, the LSV, Literal Standard Version, have genuine uses in Bible study. I'll mention them in a bit. But our best and most important translation tradition in English, that of the King James, set us on a better path than Young and the LSV would like us to be on. Okay, now, what if all this made you nervous, despite the good I do see at the heart of the literal is better view? What if you're still feeling like, wait, what? There's all this meaning in the New Testament that all Bible translators are hiding from me because they don't think I'll get it? I want every participle. I want every preposition. Every pluperfect passive pestiferous penultimate parablepsis in the Greek. First, there's never been a better day to learn Greek and Hebrew. Many people watching this video are from rich countries. You can study these languages on your own with countless free helps and other comparatively inexpensive ones. Try my friend Andrew Case's Aleph with Beth. Beth is his wife. I guess it's actually her channel, but he helps a whole lot. They're a fantastic superhero biblical languages teaching team. Try my friend Scott McQuinn's work as one of many experts at the Biblical Language Center, where they teach Biblical Hebrew and Greek as living, spoken languages like Spanish or French or German or Russian. Don't hear any of what I'm saying on this channel as a discouragement to anyone from learning Hebrew and Greek. Would that all of the Lord's people were original language exegetes. That friend, Andrew Case, has a crazy dream of bringing us nearer to that place. See my interview with him on this channel if you haven't already. Second, let's just remember, as I say so often, who gave us this situation we're in? Who made it so that nearly all Christians need the help of translators to read his inspired words? And who made it so that languages are so different, making perfect translation impossible? There are tonal languages and click languages and SVO, that's subject-verb-object languages, and OSV, object-subject-verb languages, and languages with a kabillion noun cases, and triradical languages that can be written without vowels, that's Hebrew. And there's even a Nigerian tribe, the Ubang, I think that's how you pronounce it, where men and women have separate languages. Maybe that's actually true in America too, and we just don't know it. They believe Adam and Eve spoke Ubang and that God gave them separate languages. I think that's a little bit off theologically, but not incredibly far. It was God who set up our polyglot multilingual situation. It was he who invented at Babel languages that just did every imaginable thing differently. It was our loving Heavenly Father who made it so that translation always requires tiny little trade-offs and compromises. God did it. So chill. Be still and know this. You apparently don't have to know all the niceties of Hebrew and Greek to live a life pleasing to him, though you are again welcome and encouraged to learn. Rather than getting annoyed at God for putting mediators between him and man, translators, rather than seeing the Bible translation ideal as a bunch of human computers applying ironclad rules and yielding perfect results, we should accept the situation that God has given us. Bible translation should be seen as a bunch of humans who must weigh competing but genuine values that God designed to stand in an ultimately irresolvable tension. Some translations will tend in the direction of letting form override meaning a little bit. Some will tend in the opposite direction. Actually, it's in the interplay of these tendencies that you and I, the Bible-reading public, get the most benefit, in my experience. By seeing the text from a few different angles, we see it more clearly. This has happened to me over and over for 20-plus years. Try it. I join many Bible teachers in suggesting that you regularly read and check at least one formal and one functional Bible translation, ESV and NIV. Start there. Third, context almost always tells you every detail of real importance. The stuff that gets left out is so incredibly minor. If Jesus could call some of the laws of the Old Testament minor, like tithing on herbs, then I can call tiny pieces of grammatical information that are difficult to translate minor. For an example, I'll just default back to the issue that got INCREDI-NASB started on all this. The fact that contemporary English does not distinguish between plural and singular in its second-person pronouns. The King James is undeniably more accurate in this area of language if literaler equals better. It's undeniably more faithful if literal equals moral, but I recently tested myself to see if English translations were really letting me down. John 4:48 is a great example, suggested by a skilled and intelligent King James-only YouTube commenter, of a context in which a footnote or some other method of showing off the number of the second-person pronouns is necessary in languages which don't mark them. Then Jesus said unto him, Except ye see signs and wonders, ye will not believe. He says this to one guy, but he expands it to include all the Jews. It's true, without some help from the King James or footnote or the New King James, which goes with you people to show it's plural, I wouldn't catch this. But using random.org, I picked 20 random passages that had second-person pronouns to see if they were akin to John 4:48. I wanted to see if the context in each case was sufficient to communicate the number of the pronoun to me. I read each passage in the ESV first, guessed at the number of the pronouns, and then checked the Greek to see if I was right. Here's one. This Jesus whom I proclaim to you is the Christ. I predicted this was plural. I was right. We give thanks to you, Lord God Almighty, who is and who was, for you have taken your great power and begun to reign. I predicted singular. I was right. If some Macedonians come with me and find that you are not ready, we would be humiliated, to say nothing of you for being so confident. I predicted plural. Bam! But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, etc. This one was tough because Paul could be imagining a single interlocutor, an imaginary conversation partner. But context suggested to me that he's speaking to Gentiles, plural, so I went with plural. I was wrong. He did indeed start imagining a single interlocutor. This is apparently a thing in Paul. He does this. Got it wrong. When he saw their faith, he said, Man, your sins are forgiven you. Gonna have to go with singular on this one. Ding, 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 ding. Right again. I won't take you through all 20, which I did while my family was watching a movie. You'll just have to believe me that I got one more wrong for a total score of 90%, 18 out of 20, A-. If marking all these for number were truly crucial to get the meaning across, as one of my commenters once told me, I should be getting around half of them wrong while reading a contemporary English version. It should be like a coin toss. I should be stymied by contemporary English's utter failure to mark number in these forms. But language carries redundancies. Context led me correctly in the great majority of cases. The two cases where I was tripped up, the other was 1 Corinthians 4:7, were both ones in which Paul was speaking to imaginary interlocutors. In other words, the sense is singular, but the reference is plural. He's using an imaginary person to represent, to point to the views or situation of many people. So I really don't think I misunderstood either passage because of the tiny amount of grammatical information that I missed. And missed because God made it so that not all languages handle pronouns in precisely the same ways. I'd be happy for footnotes to handle this minor mismatch between Greek and English in those few places where context is an insufficient guide. Translations already tend to do this kind of thing. I am happy to leave that determination to qualified translators. What I don't want to do is say, literaler is better, and force English into a strange mold that will cause confusion for readers. Isn't God capable of using our pronouns? Don't buy the latest literaler than thou gimmick. And when I say don't buy it, I actually don't mean don't purchase it. Go ahead, get the literal standard version if you want it. I mean don't believe the marketing copy. I see utterly no problem, plenty of benefit for the right readers in hyper-literal versions. The INCREDI-NASB would help a lot of Hebrew and Greek students. They're the real audience for these works. And truth be known, a lot of pastors whose Hebrew and Greek is rusty could use this help. I myself have worked on forming a project to produce something kind of like the INCREDI-NASB. But my project, if it ever comes to fruition, would not claim that literal equals moral, or even better, only that literal equals useful. In some circumstances, for some readers, it's good, it's useful to have a highly literal rendering. Most of those readers, I think, already know something of the original languages. They just need help using them. So such a translation is not really a translation into English. It's a leg up. It's a set of crib notes for Hebrew and Greek students. And that's what literal translations tend to become over time when they get into the literal or the now game. I am not saying that literal translations are bad. Our church uses one. The King James tradition of basically literal but still very literary translation has, in my mind, proven its utility. My main translation, if you can call it that, is pretty much literal, the ESV. So by critiquing the tendency to call literal better or even moral, I am not continuing the infighting among evangelicals, especially my fellow conservatives, about Bible translation. I'm trying to end it. I'm trying to end Bible translation tribalism, trying to get evangelicals to see the good in all good evangelical translations. I'm trying to change better to useful. Literal is useful in lots of situations. It's a great fallback and or starting point. But if you make it your ending point, if you make it your goal, you will never actually get there. It's impossible. And if literal translation is an unattainable ideal, maybe we shouldn't make it the sole ideal. Maybe we should recognize that we have to trust someone's judgment to decide on the balance of formal and functional renderings in a given Bible translation. And the race for the holy grail of a translation that gives us everything we want is like the guy who always swipes whatever direction you swipe on Tinder when you're dissatisfied with every single option. Literal is valuable, but so are other things, like understandability. Maybe INCREDI-NASB should get together with ELASTINIV, and we should be thankful for both supers. Both of them help us defeat the evil villain called ignorant misunderstanding of God's word.